The restaurant was the kind people took photos of before they even sat down. Crystal glasses caught the warm light. Soft music floated through the room like it belonged there. Every table held people dressed with purpose, tailored suits, polished shoes, quiet confidence. This was a place where reservations were hard to get and harder to deserve. That was why heads began to turn when the man walked in. He didn't look lost. He didn't rush. He simply opened the door and stepped inside, holding it for his daughter as she followed him in. He wore plain clothes. Nothing loud, nothing that announced money or status. Just clean, simple, almost forgettable. The kind of outfit no one notices in a room like this, until they decide to judge it. His daughter stayed close to him. She looked around with curiosity, not fear. This wasn't her world, but she trusted the man beside her completely. He guided her forward with a gentle hand at her back, eyes calm, posture relaxed, like he had nowhere else to be, and all the time in the world. A few guests paused mid-conversation. A couple at the bar glanced over, then back to their drinks. One man smirked. Another leaned toward his companion and whispered something that made her laugh quietly. In this room, people were used to measuring others the second they walked in. Near the entrance, a waiter noticed them too. He didn't smile. He didn't greet them like the others. His eyes went straight to the man's shoes, then his jacket, then back to his face. The judgment was instant. The decision already made. As the father and daughter approached the host's stand, the waiter stepped in front of them. Not aggressively, just enough to block their path. His voice cut through the soft music, louder than it needed to be. "Excuse me," he said, glancing around as if making sure others were watching. "This area is reserved." The man met his eyes calmly. "We have a reservation." The waiter raised an eyebrow, slow and exaggerated. He looked at the daughter and back at the father and let out a short laugh that wasn't friendly. "I'm sure you think you do," he replied, "but this isn't that kind of place." A few nearby tables went quiet. Someone coughed. Someone else shifted in their chair. The daughter felt it immediately. Her shoulders stiffened. She looked up at her father, confused, waiting for him to say something. The waiter wasn't done. "Look," he continued, his voice carrying now, "we're very busy tonight. People wait months to eat here. I don't want to embarrass you, but you might be more comfortable somewhere else." A pause, long enough to hurt. The word embarrass hung in the air, heavy and deliberate. A couple of guests smiled awkwardly. One woman looked down at her plate, suddenly interested in her food. No one stepped in. No one spoke up. The man didn't raise his voice. He didn't argue. He didn't explain who he was or why he was there. He simply stood there, breathing evenly, eyes steady, listening. His daughter's face flushed. She opened her mouth, then closed it again. Her fingers tightened around the strap of her bag. This wasn't just rude. It was public. It was intentional. The waiter crossed his arms, clearly expecting a reaction, an apology, anger, anything he could use to feel justified. But the man only looked at him quietly. And in that silence, something shifted, because this wasn't the silence of someone defeated. It was the silence of someone deciding. And as the room waited, unaware of what was about to unfold, one thing became clear. This moment wasn't going to end the way anyone expected. The restaurant carried a reputation long before anyone stepped inside. People talked about it in lowered voices, like mentioning a private club or a hidden address only the right names knew. It wasn't just about the food. Plenty of places served expensive meals. This place sold something else, belonging. The air itself felt curated. The lighting was warm but deliberate, soft enough to flatter faces and sharper edges. Marble floors reflected subtle gold accents. Every chair, every plate, every polished surface suggested precision. Nothing was accidental here. Even the silence between conversations felt managed. Most of the guests knew the rules without being told. They spoke just loud enough to be heard by the people who mattered. Watches peeked from under tailored sleeves. Handbags rested on chairs like trophies. Phones were placed face down on tables, not out of politeness, but confidence. No one important needed to check notifications here. This was a room where status wasn't announced. It was assumed. Servers moved with rehearsed elegance, memorizing faces, recognizing regulars. A nod here, a smile there, names remembered, preferences anticipated. In this place, being recognized meant more than being welcomed, and being unknown meant everything else. The culture of the restaurant had been shaped over years not by written rules, but by quiet signals. Who got greeted first? Who got the best tables? Who was made to wait? Appearances mattered here, sometimes more than money itself. If you looked like you belonged, you were treated accordingly. If you didn't, the room slowly reminded you. At one corner table, a group of men leaned back comfortably, laughing in short, controlled bursts. Their jackets were perfectly fitted. One of them checked his watch, not because he was in a hurry, but because he could. At another table, a couple toasted with crystal glasses, barely glancing at the menu. They already knew what they were ordering. They always did. This restaurant rewarded familiarity and punished hesitation. Against that backdrop, the man and his daughter stood out, not because they were loud or awkward, but because they didn't perform. The man didn't scan the room to measure himself against others. He didn't straighten his jacket or adjust his posture to match anyone else. He stood as he was, unbothered by the unspoken hierarchy humming around him. His daughter noticed more than he did. Her eyes moved from table to table, reading the room instinctively. She could feel it, the way people looked past them or through them. The way some glances lingered just a moment too long, not curious, but assessing. She had been in nice places before. But this felt different, less warm, less human. The father noticed her shift slightly and placed a hand lightly on her shoulder, not to protect her from danger but from discomfort. A small, grounding gesture. She exhaled slowly. To the restaurant, they were an interruption, a question mark in a room full of exclamation points. The waiter who had stopped them reflected the culture perfectly. He wasn't inventing his behavior, he was enforcing it. In his mind, he was protecting the standards of the place. The look, the tone, the balance of power. People like him learned quickly who mattered and who didn't. And in places like this, authority often borrowed confidence from the room itself. Around them, conversations resumed, but at a lower volume. People pretended not to listen while listening closely. This was better than entertainment. This was social theater. A reminder of where everyone stood. The daughter felt the heat of it, the embarrassment, not because she believed the waiter was right, but because no one was stopping him. Silence has a way of choosing sides without saying a word. The man remained still, not stiff, not tense, just present. He didn't scan for approval. He didn't look for allies. He stood comfortably in a space that clearly wasn't built with him in mind, and somehow didn't shrink because of it. That contrast unsettled the room more than shouting ever could. Because in a place obsessed with status, there is nothing more disruptive than someone who doesn't seem to care about it. The restaurant had seen arguments before. Loud people. Entitled guests. Apologies. Scenes. Those always ended the same way. Security apologies, someone leaving, order restored. But this was different. This wasn't chaos. It was calm. And calm, in a room built on ego, felt dangerous. The staff sensed it too. A hostess glanced over, then away. A server slowed his steps, pretending to adjust a tray. Something felt off, though no one could explain why. The daughter looked up at her father again. This time, she wasn't confused. She was curious. She had seen this look before, not often, but enough to recognize it. The look he wore when he was listening more than speaking, when he was letting people reveal themselves fully. The room waited, unaware that it was holding its breath. Because places like this are used to judging others, they are not used to being judged back. Before anything else happened, take a moment and tell me, what part grabbed you the most so far? The waiter's attitude, the tension in the room, or the quiet confidence of the father? The waiter took one small step forward, enough to reassert control without touching them. It was a practiced move, subtle but intentional. He had done this before. He knew how to make people feel small without ever raising his voice. He glanced again at the man's clothes, this time more openly, like he wanted everyone to notice what he was noticing. His lips curled into something that wasn't quite a smile. "I'm trying to help you," he said, loud enough for the nearest tables to hear. "This restaurant has expectations." The word hung there, polished and sharp. The man didn't interrupt. He didn't flinch. He simply waited. That silence seemed to irritate the waiter more than any argument would have. He shifted his weight, straightened his vest, and continued, feeding off the attention he was now receiving. "People come here to enjoy their evening," he went on. "They don't want surprises. They don't want misunderstandings." His eyes flicked briefly to the daughter, then back to the father, lingering just long enough to sting, especially when they're paying what they pay. A few people nearby exchanged looks. One man at a corner table leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, clearly entertained. Another guest frowned but said nothing. The room allowed it to continue. The daughter felt her chest tighten. She wasn't used to being spoken about like an inconvenience. She took a half step closer to her father without thinking, her voice rising before she could stop it. "We're not causing any trouble," she said. "We just—" The waiter cut her off immediately. "Miss," he said, holding up a finger, "I'm speaking to your father." The dismissiveness was effortless, casual, cruel in its simplicity. He turned back to the man. "Like I said, I don't want this to get awkward. It already is, frankly, but we can still fix it." "Fix it," he repeated, nodding toward the door. "There are plenty of places nearby that might suit you better." The implication was clear. Everyone heard it. "You don't belong here." A faint, uncomfortable chuckle came from somewhere behind them. Someone else cleared their throat. Still, no one intervened. The waiter sensed his moment and pressed harder. "We take our standards seriously," he continued. "Dress code, atmosphere, clientele." He gestured vaguely around the room. "This isn't casual dining." The man finally spoke, his voice calm and even. "We have a reservation." The waiter laughed, sharper this time. "Sir, I've been working here a long time. I know our guests." He looked the man up and down again, slower now. "And I would remember you." That landed exactly as intended. The daughter's face burned, not from shame but from anger. She had felt judged before, but never like this, never so publicly, never with such confidence. She searched the faces around them, hoping to catch someone's eye, to find a hint of discomfort, a signal that this was wrong. Most people looked away. The waiter leaned slightly closer, lowering his voice just enough to sound reasonable, though it still carried. "Let's not turn this into a scene," he said. "I'm giving you an out." The man met his gaze steadily. No challenge, no fear, just attention. That unnerved the waiter. He straightened abruptly and raised his voice again, reclaiming the room. "I'll need you to step aside," he said. "You're blocking the entrance." It was no longer about policy. It was about dominance. The daughter inhaled sharply, ready to protest, but her father lifted a hand, not abruptly, not forcefully, just enough to stop her. His eyes never left the waiter's face. The waiter noticed the gesture and scoffed. "Sir, don't make this harder than it needs to be." A nearby table shifted. A woman whispered something to her companion. The atmosphere had changed. What began as judgment had turned into something heavier. Tension thickened the air. The waiter mistook it for support. "Look around," he said, sweeping his hand across the room. "Do you really think this is the place for you?" It was the most direct insult yet, stripped of politeness, sharpened by certainty. The daughter clenched her jaw, her fingers curled into her palm. This wasn't just about a table anymore, it was about dignity. The waiter waited for a reaction, an argument, a raised voice, something he could point to as proof that he was right. Instead, the man remained still. That stillness stretched the moment thin. The waiter frowned, unsettled by the lack of response. He filled the silence again, unable to let it sit. "If you don't move," he said, irritation slipping into his tone. "I'll have to call my manager." He said it like a threat, like a final card. The daughter looked up at her father one more time. This time, she saw something different in his expression, not anger, not frustration, but patience. Deep, deliberate patience. The waiter didn't see it. He was too busy proving something to a room full of strangers. "Last chance," he said. And in that instant, the balance shifted. Not because the man moved, but because he didn't. The room expected an explosion, raised voices, demands, a sharp exchange that would justify everything the waiter had already decided. In places like this, conflict followed a familiar script. Someone pushed back, someone escalated, authority stepped in, order was restored. But none of that happened. The man didn't move. He didn't sigh or roll his eyes. He didn't straighten his shoulders to look bigger or shrink himself to disappear. He simply stood there, hands relaxed at his sides, breathing slow and steady, as if the noise around him barely registered. It was unsettling. His face showed no anger, no embarrassment, not even irritation, just focus, like he was observing something carefully, letting it unfold exactly as it was meant to. The waiter shifted again, uncomfortable now, though he didn't know why. He had expected resistance. Silence wasn't part of the plan. Silence didn't give him anything to push against. The man's eyes never left him. They weren't cold. They weren't hard. They were calm in a way that made the waiter feel suddenly exposed, like his performance was being watched instead of applauded. The daughter noticed it first. She had seen her father quiet before, at home, in moments that mattered. This wasn't indifference. This was restraint, the kind that came from knowing exactly when to speak and when not to. Her heartbeat slowed as she watched him. The embarrassment faded, replaced by something steadier, trust. Around them, the room began to feel the shift. Conversation stalled again. Forks paused halfway to mouths. People sensed that something important was happening, even if they couldn't explain it. The waiter tried to regain control. "Sir," he said sharper now, "I need an answer." The man finally spoke, but not in the way anyone expected. "Are you finished?" he asked. His voice wasn't loud. It didn't need to be, it carried anyway, cutting through the room without a blink. "Excuse me?" "Are you finished?" the man repeated calmly. That was all. No defense, no explanation, no plea. Just a question. It caught the waiter off guard. He hesitated for half a second too long, searching for the upper hand he suddenly felt slipping. "I'm doing my job," the waiter said, forcing confidence back into his tone. The man nodded once, slowly. "Then do it." The simplicity of the response landed heavier than any argument could have. It offered no opening, no weakness, no emotional hook. The daughter watched the waiter's face tighten. She could tell he was frustrated, not because he was losing an argument, but because he couldn't start one. The man turned his attention away from him for the first time and looked down at his daughter. His expression softened instantly. The shift was subtle but unmistakable. "You okay?" he asked quietly. She nodded. "Yeah." That moment did more than any confrontation ever could. It reminded everyone watching what this was really about. Not ego, not power, just presence. The man turned back to the waiter. "We'll wait," he said. "Wait. Not leave, not comply, not argue. Wait." The word echoed through the room. The waiter opened his mouth, then closed it again. He hadn't expected cooperation. He hadn't expected patience, and he certainly hadn't expected to feel unsure. The silence returned, heavier now, not awkward, intentional. The man didn't check his watch, didn't glance around, didn't try to reassure himself with the room's approval. He stood comfortably in the middle of it all, like time bent slightly around him. Somewhere behind the bar, a server stopped pretending not to watch. At a nearby table, a man leaned forward, elbows on the table, eyes fixed. A woman across the room frowned, clearly uncomfortable with how long this was taking. The waiter felt it. The attention had shifted. This was no longer entertainment. It was scrutiny. He cleared his throat. "I'll get the manager," he said, the confidence in his voice thinner now. The man nodded again. "Please." No sarcasm, no edge, just calm. As the waiter walked away, the daughter exhaled slowly. She hadn't realized she'd been holding her breath. The man placed a hand lightly on her shoulder again. "Grounding, steady, it's fine," he said softly, more to her than to anyone else. And somehow, in a room full of expensive noise and fragile egos, that quiet assurance carried the most weight. People began whispering, not with amusement now, but curiosity. Questions formed. Assumptions wavered. Something about the man didn't fit the role he'd been assigned, and the room was starting to notice. Because there is a particular kind of power that doesn't announce itself. It doesn't threaten, it doesn't rush, it waits. And as the seconds stretched on, one truth became impossible to ignore. Whatever the waiter thought he was dealing with, he was wrong. "Before we go on, tell me, was it the silence, the calm response, or the way he protected his daughter that stood out to you most?" The room didn't return to normal after the waiter walked away. It couldn't. Something had been interrupted, and everyone felt it. At first, people pretended nothing was happening. Conversations restarted in fragments, sentences picked up where they had left off, but the rhythm was wrong. Laughter came a beat too late. Voices dropped lower than before. Eyes kept drifting back toward the entrance, toward the man and his daughter standing quietly in plain sight. A woman at a nearby table leaned toward her companion and whispered, "What's going on?" "I don't know," he murmured back, never taking his eyes off them. A server paused near the bar, tray balanced in one hand, pretending to check an order while watching the scene unfold in the reflection of the mirror behind the bottles. Another staff member adjusted a table setting that didn't need adjusting, stalling for time. This wasn't the kind of tension that came from noise or chaos. It came from waiting. The man remained exactly where he was, not stiff, not defiant, just present. As if standing there cost him nothing at all. His daughter stayed close, her posture calmer now, her earlier embarrassment replaced by quiet awareness. She could feel the attention in the room, but it no longer pressed down on her. It hovered instead, uncertain. People began to reassess. The couple who had laughed earlier no longer looked amused. One of them frowned, shifting uncomfortably in his chair. The man at the corner table, who had leaned back with interest, now leaned forward, elbows resting on the table, curiosity replacing entertainment. Whispers spread low and cautious. "Did you hear what he said? He didn't even raise his voice. Why is he so calm?" In a place where confidence was usually loud, this kind of composure stood out like a challenge. Behind the host stand, the hostess glanced toward the back hallway where the waiter had disappeared. She swallowed and smoothed her uniform, suddenly unsure of which side of the situation she was supposed to be on. She had seen scenes like this before, but never one that felt so still. The stillness made people uneasy. The daughter noticed a woman across the room watching her with something close to sympathy. Another guest avoided eye contact entirely, staring down at his plate as if hoping the moment would pass without asking anything of him. Silence, she realized, had a way of revealing character. Time stretched. Seconds felt longer than they should have. The soft music continued to play indifferent, but it only emphasized how much attention the room was giving to what wasn't happening. The man shifted his weight slightly, a natural movement, unhurried. He glanced down at his daughter again, offering a small, reassuring nod. No words were needed, she nodded back. That exchange didn't go unnoticed. A few tables away, someone whispered, "That's his daughter." "Yes." The way he stood beside her, unbothered, protective without being possessive, didn't match the image the waiter had tried to paint. It didn't match the assumptions people had made when he first walked in. Doubt crept in. Staff members began to feel it too. One server caught the eye of another and raised her eyebrows slightly. The unspoken question passed between them. Did we misread this? In the back of the room, a door opened briefly, then closed again. Someone had gone to fetch help. Management, authority, the thing that was supposed to restore order. But as the wait continued, it became clear that order wasn't lost. Control had simply changed hands. The man wasn't trying to win anyone over. He wasn't performing for the room. That was the most unsettling part. He didn't need witnesses, yet he had them. He didn't demand attention, yet he commanded it. People who had come to be seen now found themselves watching. The daughter felt the shift fully now. What had started as humiliation was transforming into something else. Not triumph, not revenge, just a quiet reversal. The room that had judged them now seemed unsure of its judgment. A low murmur rippled through the tables as footsteps approached from the hallway. The waiter reappeared briefly at the edge of the room, standing a little farther back than before. He wasn't smiling now. His posture was tighter. He glanced toward the man, then away, then back again, like he wasn't sure what he was walking back into. The attention sharpened. Forks rested on plates. Glasses paused midair. The entire room seemed to lean almost imperceptibly toward the same point. Whatever was coming next, everyone could feel it. The man noticed none of this, or seemed not to. His focus remained narrow-grounded. He wasn't watching the room. The room was watching him, and in that quiet stretch of time, something important settled in the minds of the people present. This wasn't about a reservation anymore. It wasn't about clothing or appearances. It wasn't even about the waiter. It was about the kind of authority that doesn't need to announce itself until it's ready. The daughter sensed it too, a subtle tightening in the air, like the moment just before a storm breaks. She didn't feel afraid. She felt steady, because whatever happened next, she knew one thing for certain. Her father had already won the moment. The room just hadn't caught up yet. The change didn't announce itself with raised voices or hurried steps. It arrived quietly, the way real authority often does. A figure emerged from the hallway behind the host's stand, walking with purpose but without urgency. His posture alone shifted the room. Conversations fell away almost instantly. Staff straightened. Servers paused where they stood. This was the manager. He scanned the room once, taking in the stalled energy, the unnatural silence, the way every eye had already turned toward the same place. Then his gaze settled on the man standing near the entrance. For a fraction of a second, his expression remained neutral. Then it changed, not dramatically, not theatrically, just enough. His pace slowed as he approached, his attention narrowing. He looked at the man's face more closely now, not his clothes, not his posture, his face. Something clicked, recognition delayed but undeniable. The manager stopped a few feet away. The waiter hovered behind him, no longer confident, no longer in control. His shoulders were tense, his jaw set. He waited for the manager to speak, expecting confirmation, support, validation. Instead, the manager's tone softened. "Good evening, sir," he said. The respect in his voice was immediate and unmistakable. It carried through the room like a sudden change in temperature. The man inclined his head slightly. "Good evening." The daughter felt it before she understood it. The shift. The way the balance tilted decisively in a direction no one had predicted. The manager glanced briefly at the daughter, then back at the man. "I apologize for the delay," he said. "There seems to have been a misunderstanding." The word misunderstanding landed hard. The waiter stiffened. He opened his mouth, ready to explain, to justify himself, to reclaim the story. The manager raised a hand gently, without even looking at him. "I'll handle this," he said. That was all it took. He turned back to the man. "Sir," he continued, lowering his voice slightly, "we weren't expecting you this evening." The man didn't react. Plans change. A pause, then the manager nodded, almost to himself. "Yes," he said. "They do." He took a breath, then spoke again, this time clearly, deliberately. "Mr. Seagal, welcome." The name rippled through the room like a dropped glass. Steven Seagal. A few people inhaled sharply. Someone at the bar froze mid-sip. A chair scraped softly against the floor as someone shifted in disbelief. Heads turned, eyes widened. The whispering that followed was no longer speculation, it was realization. The waiter's face drained of color. He stared at the man he had just dismissed, insulted, spoken over. His mouth opened slightly, but no sound came out. His confidence collapsed in real time, replaced by shock so complete it left him standing perfectly still. The daughter looked up at her father, then back at the room. She saw it all now, the sudden respect, the recalculations, the silent apologies forming in people's expressions. She felt no triumph, just clarity. The manager continued, unaware or unconcerned with the shockwaves spreading behind him. "We have a table prepared," he said. "Of course, and I want to personally apologize for how you were treated." He turned slightly, his eyes flicking toward the waiter at last. The look wasn't angry. It didn't need to be. It was disappointed. "I'll take care of this," the manager said quietly. The waiter swallowed. His hands trembled at his sides. He nodded once, unable to meet anyone's eyes. Steven Seagal spoke then, his voice steady, measured. "I'm not here for an apology," he said. The room leaned in again. "I brought my daughter for dinner," he continued. "That's all." The simplicity of it cut deeper than anger ever could. The manager nodded. "Of course." Steven looked at the waiter, not with hostility, not with satisfaction. "Just once, long enough." "You judged before you listened," he said calmly. "That's a mistake." The waiter nodded again, faster this time. "I am sorry," he managed. Steven turned away, the moment already finished for him. He placed a hand lightly on his daughter's shoulder. "Shall we?" he asked. She smiled softly. "Yeah." As they followed the manager toward the dining area, the room remained silent, stunned not by the reveal, but by how quietly it had arrived. Because power hadn't raised its voice. It had simply spoken its name. "Before we move to the final moment, let me ask you, when the name was revealed, did you feel shock, satisfaction, or something quieter than both?" The table they were led to wasn't the best one in the room. It wasn't tucked away in a private corner or placed beneath the brightest light. It didn't overlook anything spectacular. It was simply comfortable, respectful, human. Steven noticed that immediately and approved without saying a word. As they sat down, the noise of the restaurant slowly returned, but it was different now, softer, more careful. Conversations resumed, but people spoke with less certainty than before. The room had been reminded of something it preferred to forget. The manager pulled the chair out for Steven's daughter himself, then stepped back. "Please let me know if there's anything you need," he said. "Anything at all?" Steven nodded once. "Thank you." That was enough. The manager left without another word, already giving instructions in hushed tones to staff who now moved with heightened awareness. No one looked at the waiter. He had been quietly reassigned, removed from sight without spectacle or humiliation. The correction was firm but silent. That mattered. Steven's daughter glanced around, noticing the subtle changes, the way servers avoided eye contact but carried themselves more carefully, the way nearby guests pretended not to stare while clearly watching every movement at their table. She leaned toward her father. "You didn't have to say anything," she said quietly. Steven smiled faintly. That's the point, she understood. The meal arrived, plated with precision, but neither of them rushed. They spoke softly, easily, like they were anywhere else. Like this was just dinner. The earlier tension faded from the table, though it still lingered in the room like a lesson no one wanted to repeat. Across the restaurant, a man who had watched the entire exchange leaned back in his chair and shook his head. "That's how you do it," he murmured to his companion. Another guest whispered, "I would have lost my temper." "Yeah," someone replied, "but that's why it worked." Stephen didn't hear any of it. He was focused on his daughter, listening as she talked, nodding when she spoke, fully present. The world could recalibrate itself on its own. By the time dessert was served, the story had already settled into something quieter than gossip. It wasn't about a celebrity being recognized. It wasn't about a waiter losing face. It was about restraint. The daughter noticed how differently people looked at her now, not with admiration, not with envy, but with respect earned, not demanded. She felt no urge to return their stares. She had learned something important. On their way out, the manager met them again near the entrance. He thanked them once more. Careful not to overdo it, Stephen nodded politely and extended his hand. The handshake was brief, firm, equal, no hard feelings. Stephen said calmly, "Just a reminder." The manager exhaled, relieved. "Understood." As the door opened and the night air rushed in, the restaurant seemed to shrink behind them. Its polished surfaces and fragile hierarchies felt less impressive now. Outside, the city hummed as usual, unaware of what had just happened inside. Stephen paused for a moment, then turned to his daughter. "You okay?" he asked again. She smiled, this time without hesitation. "Yeah, I am." They walked away together, unbothered, unhurried. Inside, the restaurant carried on, but something subtle had changed. The room would remember this night, not as a scandal, not as a confrontation, but as a correction. Because true power doesn't embarrass others. It doesn't shout. It doesn't rush to prove itself. It waits, listens, and responds only when necessary. And respect. Respect is never about where you eat, what you wear, or who recognizes your name. It's about how you treat people when you think no one important is watching. More stories like this are coming, stories about quiet strength, unexpected moments, and the kind of dignity that doesn't fade when the spotlight moves on. If any part of this one stood out to you, share it and let us know what resonated most. Your feedback helps shape the stories we tell next.